What would you do if someone showed interest in you, but then said they weren't interested in dating? Today, we're going to find out. I'm Leah Carey, schmex and relationship coach, and we're here to talk about the good, the bad, and the downright terrible advice given by Dear Abby. Do you swear by Dear Abby or at Dear Abby? Let's get into it. Mixed Messages in Pennsylvania writes, Dear Abby, I recently met a man who asked me to have coffee with him, then said he isn't marriage or dating minded. I feel drawn to him. The last time I saw him, he asked to hold my hand. I understand that in dating, we may find out that we're not going to get married, but we haven't even dated yet. I suppose I appreciate that he's admitting he already knows he doesn't like me enough to marry me, but why ask to hold my hand then? Why ask me to sit down for coffee? Is he playing hard to get? Abby responds, I wish that when he asked for your hand, but not in marriage, you had asked him if he intended to read your palm. I agree that he's sending you mixed messages. However, only one person can answer your legitimate questions, and that person is him. Before I answer, remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be notified about future videos. So I am puzzled by both the question and the response, because they both seem to be suggesting that the only reason that somebody might be interested in having a conversation and even touching another person would be because they ultimately want to get married. To me, that's kind of crazy. Okay, so I'm going to go from the small picture to the large picture, and let's start with touch. One of the things that I have noticed in my work in this field is that people who are brought up as little girls tend to have a very wide vocabulary of touch. You know, when we were growing up and maybe we went to sleepovers and we braided each other's hair, or we did each other's makeup and painted each other's nails and we gave each other massages. There are lots of types of touch that we learned were acceptable within the boundaries of platonic friendship. Unfortunately, people who are brought up as little boys got a very different vocabulary of touch. For them, there might have been a lot of touch when they were little, but by the time they're sometimes 7 or 8, sometimes it's 10 or 12, but somewhere in that range between 7 and 12, most boys get the message that wanting touch or asking for touch or needing touch makes them gay, because that's a thing that girls do. The result is that really the only touch that teen boys growing up into young men get is either through having romantic and intimate relationships and on the sports field where they're allowed to pat each other's butts or whatever it is that happens during sports, and even tackling each other, maybe during football. That is a form of touch. Unfortunately, what gets lost for boys is that there's all this other type of touch that is not only pleasurable, but actually desirable, because it helps you to keep all of your brain synapses working in proper order. And here's the weird thing that happens. When we're with other women, we think nothing of incidental touch. You put a hand on your friend's shoulder when you're asking if they want something from the bar, or maybe you put your hand on your friend's knee when you're laughing about something together. Maybe you even cuddle up on the couch together if one of you has just had a devastating breakup. Those types of woman-woman touch are perfectly acceptable and kind of non-remarkable. But because we expect men to not have that vocabulary of touch, and this is an unspoken and often unrecognized assumption, when they do offer some type of touch, we immediately assume that it means something, that it has to be romantically or sexually charged. But what about the guys who have a wider vocabulary of touch than the average man? They very frequently get misunderstood as wanting things that they don't necessarily want because they're engaging in touch that feels natural to them, but is outside our expectations of what a heterosexual cisgender man is going to want or participate in. You'll find that women tend to be very drawn to these men without even necessarily knowing why, because they're getting something from them that you don't get from the average man, but also that these women are frequently misunderstanding the messages that they're receiving. And it's not because the man is doing anything wrong. He is, in fact, not sending mixed messages. In fact, this man has been extraordinarily clear that he enjoys her, he maybe wants to hold her hand, but he's not looking for a relationship. He's not looking for marriage. Does that mean that he's not looking for any touch beyond hand-holding? No, he hasn't told us that. But it does mean that he is being really clear with this woman about what his desires and his boundaries are. I would like to hold your hand. I enjoy spending time with you. I enjoy talking with you. I might even enjoy a little roll in the hay if you're up for it, but I don't want things to go any further than that. And he does not in any way say, I don't want to go further than that because I'm not interested in you as a prospect, but rather I'm not interested in marriage as a prospect. And too frequently, we get those things mixed up. So when mixed messages says, I appreciate that he's admitting he already knows he doesn't like me enough to marry me, but why ask to hold my hand then? She's got the whole thing backwards. He is giving her information up front that says, I'm not in a place right now that I want to get married. That has absolutely nothing to do with her. And I also enjoy you enough, I enjoy your presence and your company enough that I want to have a little bit more physical connection with you than if we're just sitting across the table from each other and both holding our coffee cups. This is also a great example of how in this culture we have expectations about relationships that are very rigid. In fact, they're so rigid that there's a term for it. The Relationship Escalator. This was coined by a woman named Amy Garan, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. She's written a book called Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator, where she talks about what the expectations are and how we can subvert them if they don't actually work for our lives. So basically, the relationship escalator looks kind of like this. On the first step, we meet somebody new. We like them enough to go on a date with them. We have enough fun on that date to get a little more invested in them. We're having a good enough experience that we decide to become monogamous with them. Once we're monogamous, maybe we say we love each other. Once we love each other, we move in together. Once we're living together, we get married. Once we're married, we have kids. And once we have kids, then we spend the rest of our lives together so that we have a successful relationship and die while we're both still married. When put in those terms, it actually, I think, sounds kind of ridiculous, but we don't think about it. And so this is like a totally unconscious expectation. Now, different people will do some of those steps in a different order, but we ultimately absolutely have the expectation that people are dating to get married and getting married in order to have families, and that the only successful relationship is one where you are able to fulfill till death do us part. So one of you has to die in order for the relationship to be successful, which, I don't know, if you ask me, is balls out crazy. So what does stepping off the relationship escalator mean? It means that you can date somebody casually and enjoy the experience without expecting that the next step is to go steady. It means that you can date a bunch of different people and get really invested in multiple of them and continue to date non-monogamously. So you're not actually trying to get to that, one and only commitment and buying a house together and getting married and having kids. It could mean that you choose to have kids with somebody, but there's no expectation of marriage or growing old together. There are so many ways that people can subvert this relationship escalator so that their life works for them. But the expectation is still so rigid that we end up with questions like this, where it's unthinkable to imagine that somebody might want to touch your hand if they have any other expectation except I'm dating toward marriage. There is nothing wrong with knowing what you want. And there's nothing wrong with wanting something other than what most people consider normal. Normal is kind of like a trend. We talk about clothing being trendy, and it comes and goes in a few years or a decade or sometimes a season or a few months. Trends come and go. What is normal is also a trend. It used to be normal for men to wear stacked heels and wigs. Today, we would consider that absolutely abnormal. It used to be normal that women only wore skirts and that wearing pants was a sign of trying to be too masculine. That is a trend that has now passed. Now, I'm not saying that wanting lifelong companionship is some sort of trendy thing. What I'm saying is that this very prescribed level of steps is something that we have become to believe is innate for us, when actually it's not necessarily innate for everyone. So what would I do if I were working with mixed messages? Well, first, I would want to help her get really clear about what it is she's looking for. What are her minimum requirements for a satisfying relationship? In order to be really happy, does she need to be dating toward marriage? If yes, that's fine, but we need to know so that she can eliminate anybody who's not wanting to date toward marriage. If she's looking for companionship and she wants there to be a physical aspect of the relationship, but in questioning her own motives, she realized, oh, you know what? I thought I was supposed to be dating toward marriage, but actually, I don't think I really do want that right now. Well, then that changes her minimum requirements for a satisfying relationship. Is she okay with intimacy without romantic feelings? Is she okay with romantic feelings without intimacy? There are so many different ways this can look, but first we need to break the hold that this relationship escalator has on our thoughts and our assumptions. The other thing I would want to offer to mixed messages is this resource, How I'm Willing to Be Treated. It looks at your basic needs and what boundaries you can create to make sure they're getting met, and how to maintain those boundaries if they're being pushed. It looks at the difference between rules and boundaries and agreements, and I also share a really personal story of how I was able to transform my relationship completely by putting a really basic boundary in place. Was this helpful? I hope so. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and here's the question of the week. Should dating always be seen as a pathway to marriage? Would you continue seeing someone if they said they weren't interested in a serious relationship or marriage? Please leave a comment below. I really look forward to hearing what you think. And remember, you're worthy of love, and I'm going to help you get there, one conversation at a time.